Welcome. Welcome students, welcome faculty, welcome staff to the end of the school year and the beginning of the summer and what lies ahead. I am Alexis Dinno. I'm faculty at the OHSU PSU School of Public Health. My home campus is here at PSU, and I am a social epidemiologist. When I meet people at parties and tell them I'm an epidemiologist, they give me a funny look. And then they say, skin? And I say, no, that would make me an epidermatologist. So epidemiologists study health and disease in populations, and social epidemiologists study how society shapes the health of populations and individuals. So there are, as you're going to learn, if you don't already have an inkling, there are maybe two kinds of scientists in this world. There are what we might call content scientists who focus on really getting into a very particular question, right? Digging down and becoming the world's expert in the expression of some enzyme in a culture. Right? And then there are those of us who are thematic scientists, and I'm a thematic scientist. So I've drawn a map of my themes, and my themes lie at the intersection of quantitative methodology, I like to geek out with numbers, social justice, and neighborhood ecology, and sort of neighborhood level determinants of human health. So I thought I'd throw up on the screen a few topics that present some opportunities for collaboration, my collaboration with students at the moment. The first of them is actually one of the EXITO scholars who can't be with us today, and I and a postbac and I are working on a Portland Metro Transgender Healthcare Services Survey. That is, for those of us who are transgender and live in the greater Portland metro area, we'd like to know how well do Portland transgender individuals have access to healthcare? What are the barriers and what are the things that are not barriers? What is available for transgender individuals? And along with that, is healthcare access affected by experiences of anti-transgender discrimination in the Portland area? Scope of work in this project, it's well on its way, but we're looking for people to assist with data collection and data management and some assistance with data analysis. Another project, that a much larger project that we're working on, is a National Transgender Health Cohort. And cohort study is an ongoing study over time of the health of individuals where we watch how their experiences change. And we're asking what are the most common illnesses and causes of death in transgender individuals? We don't know that. Right? Someone like myself is transgender. What am I most likely to die of? Can't say. What am I most likely to get sick with? Can't say. Epidemiology has failed in this sense. We haven't studied this question. So we're trying to rectify that. Another aspect of this question is what transgender-specific determinants of health, things like anti-discrimination policies, or in the case of North Carolina, discrimination policies, increase or decrease health risks for transgender individuals. And the scope of work here includes a systematic literature review, or reviews, there are a few different ones, and synthesis, grant writing, research protocol writing. It's sort of early mid stages at getting it all together. Another project that I've been collaborating on with a student is Portland Houseless and Homeless Respiratory Health Study. Here in Portland, we have some large, semi-permanent, houseless communities, right, settlements. Dignity Village up in Northeast, and here in downtown by the Chinatown Gate, we have Right to Dream 2. And we, in collaboration with these communities, in partnership with them, have been asking how well are their lungs functioning? You know, are they experiencing COPD and asthma and other sorts of conditions? And is that explained by the siting of these settlements? Right? Dignity Village is sited at the municipal composting facility. Right? Scope of work here includes local non-academic literature review, funding exploration for further work, and developing further projects and collaborative writing with community partners. And then finally, I just wanted to point out or articulate that my aim in working with you is to A, achieve our research aims, B, develop your research skills, and C, help you discover where your own self-image and experience fits in with my own small corner of research. And there's an investment in you that's happening here, not just in the research. And I do research by arrangement with students in independent study and course credit. I also make commitment to a clear articulation of expected student products, hold weekly research meetings, communication by email, and I provide mentoring and research workflow, including file management, collaborative communication, and research skills. Awesome.
Alexis, thank you. Like yesterday, we're going to save questions until the end, so please make note as we go along, because it'll be one amazing human being to the next, and we want to make sure that we get your questions in. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Monica Hinds. I'm from the Biomedical Engineering Department at OHSU. I like to tell undergraduate students a little bit about just a few seconds on my career path. So I went to undergraduate thinking I was going to be an astronaut. I wanted to go into space. I soon realized that most of the aerospace engineering jobs were in the defense industry, and that was not something I wanted to do. And so I found my passion in biomedical engineering. And so we're applying engineering principles to the study of the human body. And the part of the human body that I'm really interested in is the cardiovascular system. And if you think about it, it's really just a series of tubes. And so I study the blood flow in the tubes and how those are affected. We're interested in many parts of the cardiovascular system. One of them are the venous valves. And it's an amazing system. I say it's a series of tubes, but there's these complex systems that work to keep blood flowing through your body. One of those are venous valves that you can see on the right. And everything from the apposition, the leaflets of that valve touching is critical. The pressures that flow are underneath, this biological structure, are critical to the success of maintaining those valves. So my lab focuses primarily on biomaterials that are available in the cardiovascular system. They've improved vastly in the last 30 to 50 years, but they really actually haven't changed that much. And so we work with stents, vascular grafts. These are different devices that you can either use to keep your arteries open if they've closed due to plaque building, or bypass it to go around it, just like in piping. You just go around where it's blocked. Or artificial venous valves, which we can deliver via a catheter to the legs if the valve gets occluded. We try to harvest what we know about the biology of the vascular system, in particular the endothelial cells. So this is a blow-up of an artery, and I always find this so amazing that our arteries are lined by a single cell-thick cell called an endothelial cell, one cell thick. And it controls all of the talk between the blood and your tissue. And so we try to use the biology of that endothelial cell to improve the biomaterials. So some of the projects that are available in my lab are looking at these surface modifications. So changing the surfaces of the materials that we study, and then doing assays, whether it's blood clotting, seeing if proteins are expressed, looking at how proteins are expressed under just in a dish, but also under flow. Going back to my mechanical engineering, we really like to have our materials in realistic situations, and so we mimic the flow conditions that they would be in vivo. We mimic those in the lab. And then as well as studying endothelial responses, whether it's to those new biomaterials, or studying sex differences. I was just reviewing NIH grants this morning, and it's amazing. NIH is making a big push to look at sex differences, and you read these grants, and they're all male animals, and so very few female animals are actually used. And that's now a requirement by the NIH, as well as the location in the body. If you think about it, an endothelial cell in your brain is going to behave much more differently than an endothelial cell in your heart. Again, from a mechanical engineering perspective, I think of the forces that those cells are under and how those change in those locations. The responses, the way we study the endothelial responses, so what you would be doing in the lab, We measure the protein expression, the gene expression. We always like to relate it to how they'll function in the body. So again, putting them under flow, how will they act or respond to those conditions? We were asked some expectations for undergraduate students that would be in our lab. Be on time, to act professional, ask questions. Like, that's the main thing. Just ask lots of questions. Everybody in our lab loves what they do. They may not love every day, but we really enjoy studying our research. And so ask questions. It's the way to learn more things. It's hard to do. I have a hard time doing it in large groups, but our environment is small, and we think we try to make that open area. And then how to be a successful researcher. Again, lots of questions. I think listening is a key point. Trying to gather in all of the information. When I go to a new conference that I haven't been, I get overwhelmed with the new information. So hearing it multiple times, everybody has to do that. It's just starting to learn the terminology, starting to learn the words that you need. Reading as much as you can, taking notes, I think is so critical. Every meeting I go into, I have a notebook. To this day, I take notes. I tell my son it uses a different part of your brain, and it is always helpful to go back there. And then I always like to make this quote that a researcher in my lab said, if it worked the first time, they would call it search and not research. So it means you have to do it again to get it to work. See, the researchers all laugh. It never works the first time. So be patient and know that, I like to think of it as a big puzzle or a mystery that you're trying to figure out how it works and what's going on. And so if you have that approach to it, I think you'll be successful in research. Thank you.
I'm Suzanne Mitchell. You might be thinking, oh, she's got a funny accent. I'm British. I have been here for a long time. But there's no reward for losing a British accent, I have discovered. Okay, so I've been in Portland since 2001. I came here from the University of New Hampshire, and before that I was in various different locales, but I'm the first of my family to go to college, let alone end up as a professor, and so I feel like I can sympathize a little bit. Any mistakes and uncertainties you guys have, I had them, and my family were like, and so my father was like, wouldn't you rather just go and work in a bank like your friend Sarah? What's the matter with you? So, that said, let me tell you a little bit about what my lab does. We are interested in how people make choices. And if you take a look at this choice here, would you rather have $9 right now or $10 in a week? And let's imagine I was really going to give you the money. I'm sorry, I can't actually afford to give you the money. But maybe let's see a show. There's no right or wrong answer, but I would take $9 now. I don't know. Oh yes, some others. Yeah. And some of you would wait. And that's what's really interesting to me. Like, why are some of us, if you like, impulsive? We don't want to wait for things. We want a bit of instant gratification. And why are others of us able to wait? How does that happen? What's going on in the brain when you make those decisions? And you know what? It doesn't have to be just about waiting. My research also looks at costs that are not just waiting, like, would you rather have $9 and you don't have to do anything, or $10, but you have to fill out this long form? Well, some of us would fill out the form and some of us would take the money, the effortless money. And we look at that too. We're interested, is that the same brain process as the waiting process? And what about things other than money? Don't know about you, but I came in here, I grabbed myself a little piece of the poppy seed cake. And, you know, really, I'm supposed to be slimming a bit. But it was, oh, I'll have a little bit of cake now and not worry about being slim and elegant later. So it doesn't have to be money. It can be other things. And that's one of the things we study. And I got a little cartoon here. It's a better or worse cartoon. Daddy, Lawrence gets $2 a week and I only get $1. And Daddy says, we'll give you more, Michael, but you have to work for it. And he says, you mean if I rake the lawns, wash the car and brush the dog, you'll pay me? And then he says, I'll take $1. That's exactly what we study. And you're probably thinking, oh, why do we study that? Well, and here's another cartoon. Why dogs rarely survive shipwrecks. And they're all in the boat, and they have their hands up. Those in favor of eating all the food now, raise your hands. They're not thinking about the delayed consequences. And in the shipwreck situation, there's a downside to that. And sometimes, but not always, there's a downside to being impulsive and wanting your rewards now. And there's a real continuum of decision making. You remember I put my hand up saying I'd rather have my $9 now. But people at the extremes, they tend to be the ones who are using drugs. And so one of the reasons we're interested in this is, okay, if this is something that predicts you might use drugs, how can we understand the brain processes and understand, we also look at the genetics as well. What are the genes involved that alter the way your brain works that makes you do these decisions? And so that's what's going in my lab. I'm hoping that some of you might want to be involved in that. I have 2 Exito students right now. One is staying on. Austin, and Devin is moving to a different placement. These are my expectations, and I am out of time, but look forward to talking to you more. Thank you.
I'm Anna Wilson, and I am a pediatric psychologist at OHSU, and I also direct research for the Division of Psychology that's in the Institute on Development and Disability. I went to undergrad thinking that I was going to be a doctor, and then quickly realized that that was going to require a lot of calculus, and that was something I wasn't quite ready to do. I think I could probably do it now and be fine, and I kind of in some ways wish I would have just done it. But I eventually got around to being a really nerdy researcher anyways, so I think that you get to where you're going to be one way or another. One of the things that people often don't know is that kids have chronic pain problems, much like adults do. This is one of the biggest public health problems in our country in terms of its cost and impact on people's day-to-day lives. So in big samples of epidemiological studies, we see 20 to 40% of kids who have pain once a week or more. And in a small portion of kids, there's high levels of disability that go along with that pain. And we know that this happens more for girls than boys. It peaks around 14 to 15 years of age. So I work in the pediatric pain management clinic that's at Dorenbecher Children's Hospital. And there are, on a given pain clinic day, which is where I'll be going right after this, Tuesday afternoons, our schedule is typically full with a lot of 14 to 15-year-old girls. And we also know that pain tends to run in families, so when you have a parent who has a chronic pain problem, you're at higher risk, which is probably due to both genetic and psychosocial and environmental factors. So we see kids who have abdominal pain, headaches, musculoskeletal pain, problems like fibromyalgia, and what really caught my interest when I started working with this population of kids was seeing how two kids could have really the exact same problem, but have very, very different outcomes in terms of how it was impacting their lives. So from a research perspective, I guess this puts me in the thematic group, since we're lumped, the lumpers and the splitters. So we're interested in what sends kids towards a path of recovering from having pain, and what sends them on the good path versus the bad path. So we know for some kids, pain persists and just does not go away. And this happens for kids in the context of their own beliefs and their own behaviors, in terms of how the context of their parents' responses, family dynamics, and then broader kind of peer, school, larger context. So I approach this from a theoretical background, thinking about child developmental processes and how that plays out for for individual kids over time. So students in our lab get a lot of experience learning about patient-reported outcomes or self-report measures. We assess a lot of pain characteristics, psychological functioning, physical functioning. There's a number of specific cognitions that kids have regarding pain that are important in predicting their disability and responses to pain. We also use laboratory pain testing methods, which is something I don't talk about at cocktail parties. Yeah, I study pain in kids, and we give them pain in the lab. It's great. But we do sometimes give them pain in the lab, and it is fine. We also use something called actigraphy, which is like a research Fitbit, basically, that gives you a lot of data about kids' physical activity and sleep patterns. And we look at how all of these things kind of work together to predict outcomes for kids. So students also have opportunities to review scientific literature, write abstracts and journal articles, and get some exposure to the types of treatments that we use for kids with pain in terms of psychology treatments. I just wanted to quickly highlight that there are 16 faculty members in our division. We are all pediatric developmental psychologists, and we've had EXITO scholars who have worked on projects with other faculty as well. So part of my role is connecting people with things that they think are interesting. So there's really a whole host of projects going on in the division at large. I really believe that it's important to tailor people's experiences as much as possible. So we spend a lot of time in the beginning of having students in the lab trying to make sure that everyone gets what they want during the course of their experience. Exposure to a variety of areas of science is going to help you identify your own interests over time. So again, you don't have to be doing exactly what you are going to be end up doing for it to be useful, because it helps you learn about the process. And I also really see that my job is to make you see that an academic or research career is possible, and it might also actually be fun. So we try to have fun. And very similar to other people's ideas about what makes it work, students who are curious ask questions, are comfortable asking for help but able to work independently, and just communicate directly. I think when we know about problems and annoyances and difficulties in our lab, that makes it, when you name the problem, you can solve the problem. So, and there's information just about getting more information about our lab.
I'm Jon Snowden. I'm appointed in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at OHSU and also in our new School of Public Health. And I'm really excited to be here today talking with you about my research on health disparities, specifically in reproductive and sexual health. So my motivation as a researcher is health disparities, and I really like this definition here from Healthy People 2020, so I'm going to read it. Health disparities adversely affect groups of people who have systematically experienced greater obstacles to health based on their racial or ethnic group, religion, socioeconomic status, gender, age, mental health, cognitive, sensory, or physical disability, sexual orientation or gender identity, geographic location, or other characteristics historically linked to discrimination or exclusion. So unfortunately, health disparities are all around us, but fortunately as researchers, we have a lot of tools to study and to help address these disparities in our society. And I would argue that it's actually not enough to just study population health, averages. We also have to think about disparities so that the interventions that we roll out don't actually make those disparities worse and worsen the health of our most vulnerable members of our society. So here's a motivating example of a disparity in maternal health. So maternal death was common before the 20th century. As much as 1% of women would die either during or right after childbirth. And it's really one of the signature accomplishments of medicine and public health that in the last 100 years, this rate decreased by more than 50-fold. So this troubling graph shows that in the past 20 years, the rate of maternal death has actually doubled in this country. It's really alarming. And equally troubling are the racial disparities in this outcome. So African American women's risk of dying during or after childbirth are 4 times higher than the risk for white women. So this is a really unacceptable disparity that affects both women, because this is an outcome that affects women's health, and also a racial minority group. So we have many tools at our disposal to address these racial disparities, right? We can think about advocacy, activism, public policy, government, business, or market-driven approaches, and of course the one that I'm here to talk to you today about is research. So I'm an epidemiologist, and we can define epidemiology as the study of the distribution and determinants of disease and health-related states and populations. And I also use the tools of health services research, which we can define as the study of how people access health care and the outcomes and costs of that care. So these two disciplines, I think, work really synergistically. Health services research focuses a bit more on things in the healthcare system, but by using epidemiology and HSR, we can help understand these disparities in our society and design approaches to ameliorate or to prevent them, right? So to return to this disparity in maternal health, we'll talk about some of the factors that underlie this disparity, things that I study. So African American women have higher rates of pre-pregnancy morbidities, things like hypertension and diabetes that they bring to pregnancy. Obesity is also a factor in this troubling trend, as well as things like poverty and social disadvantage, which are really important determinants of population health outcomes that deserve our study. So a real focus of my research is actually C-sections. So it's not always immediately apparent, the association between C-sections and maternal mortality, but there is one. So the use of C-section has really skyrocketed in the past 20 years all over the developed world, and there's good evidence to now suggest that the overuse of cesarean delivery and induction of labor and these obstetric procedures during the childbirth process actually contribute to these really troubling trends. And of course, there are other contributors to these trends as well, things like access to health care and insurance, and also discrimination. So in conclusion, we have these persistent health disparities in our society, and we must consider factors at both the individual and the population level in order to understand them and to design strategies to improve them. So once we determine those solutions, arguably as important is to put them into practice. So for this example of maternal death and the racial disparity in maternal death, things that I think about a lot are preventing postpartum hemorrhage, which is often a preventable outcome. It's one of the key predictors of maternal death. And so we can roll out toolkits or simulation protocols at the hospital or labor and delivery unit level to improve the response to this outcome. We can also think about designing early warning systems that use data that mom generates or an electronic health record or at the labor and delivery unit in real time to sort of inform choices and to identify likely adverse outcomes before they actually happen. So let's conduct rigorous research to help close these health disparities. So I don't actually have any openings right now for undergraduates in my lab, but I wanted to leave you with these pointers that I think can improve your success as an undergraduate researcher. So a topic that's come up from many speakers here is curiosity. I think curiosity and passion for your topic are really going to make you a successful researcher. Diligence and hard work, of course, are indispensable. Also, it's important to have a willingness to explore new topics and an openness to learning and to having your ideas being challenged. So you're passionate about ideas, but you're also open to other ways of thinking and to having your passionately held ideas challenged. Thank you.
This was a good segue talking about maternal health into some of the research that's going on in the Fair Neuroimaging Lab. I am a postdoc in the Fair Neuroimaging Lab, and so what that means is I'm kind of in this in-between stage where you go to school for a really long time, and then you have a postdoctoral position for a while, and then you try to figure out where to go from there. And there are lots of different paths that you can go along once you have gotten a PhD or whatever advanced degree it is that you have gotten. So if people have questions about kind of the interim stages along the path before becoming a professor, I'd be happy to talk about that. So I work in the Fair Neuroimaging Lab, and my background is actually in clinical psychology, and my research interests are, I think, really informed by that. In the Fair Neuroimaging Lab, we, broadly speaking, we study a lot of different things, but a common theme is that we study brain functioning. And the way that we study brain functioning is with magnetic resonance imaging. And so essentially it's using a giant magnet to be able to look at how the brain processes stimuli, and one way to do that is with something called task-based functional magnetic resonance imaging. And you can think about that you are going to send the brain a signal, whether it's a tone of voice, or whether it's a smell, or whether it's something visual, and you see how the brain responds. And that's an important part of healthy brain functioning, how your brain responds to all the different things that come in from the environment. The other tool that we use in the lab, and this is more the emphasis of the lab, is something called resting state functional connectivity magnetic resonance imaging. And this is a long way of saying essentially what we're looking at is your brain at rest. And what's really cool is that you can look at the brain at rest and you can see all these patterns of activity in different parts of the brain, and you can see how those patterns of activity are coordinated, and that actually gives you a lot of information about the way that your brain is functioning and the different brain systems that are required to think about different things in your environment, brain systems that are involved in emotion, brain systems that are involved in mental health and physical health. And all you have to do is have a person lying there and you get kind of this window into the brain. And so one way to think about functional connectivity is to think about that the way that a communication system is organized, you should have efficient pathways to transfer information from one part of the system to another. And this is one example of that in a communication across multiple nations. What we look at, we think about that within the brain. And what I really like about this resting state functional connectivity technique, where you can look at brain functioning across the whole brain while someone's just lying there, is that you can use it not only with adults who you can tell to lie still and do the right thing, but you can also use it with babies. So you can start looking at these complex brain systems soon after birth. And that's one of the things that I focus on in the lab. And the reason I do that is because there's a ton of brain development that happens really rapidly during gestation. So while you are, speaking of maternal health, while you are growing in the womb, your brain is developing really rapidly. And you could argue that that is, well, I don't think you could argue, I think it's true that that's the period of fastest brain development. So all these brain systems that are then going to form a foundation for our health throughout life are forming during gestation and also forming really rapidly during the first couple years of life. So I'm really interested in how those systems are formed during those early periods and what are the influences on the formation of those systems, because I think that's a great opportunity where we might be able to do preventive interventions to be able to support health across the lifespan. So this is one of tons of projects going on in the Fair Neuroimaging Lab. So I'll just give a brief overview of the projects. We have projects looking at infancy through adolescence, projects focused more on specific mental health disorders, ADHD and autism. We also do neuroimaging with animal models, so in rodents and monkeys. That's another cool thing about the techniques that we use is you can use similar techniques in human and animal, so then you can compare across species and you can conduct experiments in animals that you wouldn't do in humans. So for example, we're looking at effects of inflammation and stress in rodents and how that affects the brain development of their offspring. And similarly with monkeys, looking at effects of high-fat diet on the development of offspring brain systems that are relevant for mental health disorders. And my time is up. There's also a big computing emphasis in the lab. So if people are interested in computer science, this could be a really great atmosphere. We have a lot of people who are heavily involved in computing because all of these types of research is really computationally intensive. So that's another thing to consider with this lab. And in terms of what's required, all the things that people have talked about in terms of persistence, in terms of curiosity, slogging through some things that might not always be fun, but keeping kind of the bigger picture in mind about what your interests are. And I think also being really vocal about what your interests are to begin with and exploring what the lab has to offer are all important. These are just some of the people in the lab up here, and I think I'm out of time. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you all panelists very much. All right, scholars, I will help sort of track this, like I said, a little bit differently than I did yesterday. And I'm also going to make another adjustment from yesterday to today. Yesterday, I referred to all of our panelists' as first name, and I just sort of did that informally as colleagues. But I do think it's valuable for us to note the value of calling persons at this level of study in this part of our community by professor, by doctor, as a result of their degree and the role that they play in the university, the role that they hold in their university and in our larger community. So I am going to make that adjustment today as we address our questions to our panelists. So let's just see where the first question takes us. Yvonne, what question do you have?
Do I need a microphone? Yes, sorry. Specifically to Dr. Snowden, you mentioned at one point working by way of reverse research. What are you referring to by reverse research?
I don't remember making that comment. What's the comment?
You mentioned working by way of reverse research to prevent post-birth death.
Does anybody else remember that comment? Yeah, I think there might have been a miscommunication from my mouth to your ears because I don't think.
Okay, I could have made that up then.
I mean, I could speak to what I think that means, but I don't. I didn't mean to address that.
All right, no worries.
My question is also for Dr. Snowden.
You could speak up just a bit.
It's also for you. Hi.
Hello.
I wanted to ask if you had done any research with women that do not have insurance or that are carrying a child, because I know that NCNM does hold clinics for women that don't have insurance, and I wanted to know if you had touched base with that and if your research covers any. Yeah,
that's a great question. So the uninsured population is a population that I've looked at in my research. Unfortunately, it hasn't really been a focus yet. There's a really great researcher and obstetrician up at OHSU, Maria Rodriguez, who focuses a lot on the uninsured population. And in particular, it's a really interesting time of transition and access because women that don't have private insurance become eligible for Medicaid. You know, the requirements change quite a bit upon pregnancy. So there's greater access, which does not always translate to better outcomes, unfortunately. So it's a great question. It's a population I want to study more. And in particular, I think it's a population that is hard to study in my kind of research because I tend to work with secondary data that are just generated by processes of, in the electronic health record, insurance claims. And these data don't do a great job of capturing the experiences of people who are often the most vulnerable, who lack access to healthcare systems.
Thank you, Dr. Snowden. So let's address a question to someone other than Dr. Snowden. Go ahead, right there. Andre, thank you.
Okay. I have a question specifically for Dr. Graham and Dr. Hinds. I was just wondering how you foresee undergraduate students partaking in your labs. I just wasn't sure on that.
I'll go first because I've got the mic here. But in terms of the roles of undergraduates, I think to some degree it depends on the project and the interests of the undergraduate, but the structure now is that you would be assigned a primary person within the lab because it is a large lab. You would meet at least 1 hour per week with that person, and then aside from that, the specifics of your project are going to kind of be worked out with that person. We tend to have people usually work on some kind of task that will get you familiar with the research process. So that might involve looking at a number of different kinds of data with neuroimaging and helping us to sort that data into the place that it should go. But then meanwhile, you would also be working on a project that is of interest to you, where you would be reviewing literature, and it would also have to be, line up with the interest of the specific person you're aligned to. So you'd kind of be working on two things, one kind of more task-oriented and one more oriented in exploring research interests and developing a research question.
Thank you. Dr. Hinds?
So I really like to meet with the student and find out their interests first, because there are studies that range from working on the genes to all the way up to animals. It is very hard for a summer student to really do animal studies because I don't work with small animal models, and so there's a lot of time investment in it. If students are interested in animal models and they spend time in my lab, they're always welcome to view them and participate with them, but it's hard for that to be their primary project. So the projects tend to be either material-based, so changing the materials, doing chemistry on the materials, or altering that, or cell-based, in studying the cells and their responses. So those are sort of the two areas. But I would always meet with the students and make sure it's something that they enjoy.
Thank you very much. Yvonne, we'll come back to you and hope that your question is directed to either Dr. Wilson, Dr. Dinno, or Dr. Mitchell.
It is. Dr. Mitchell, you specifically were talking about looking at motivations and decision. Have you done any research or work with ego depletion with regards to decisions?
I haven't, but I am actually waiting for a NOGA for a grant that has that in there. And so I am hopeful that I will be doing that at some time soon. And I think that those sorts of projects, those sort of psychological type studies looking at ego depletion and its effects on impulsive behavior and impulsive decision making are ideal for students to be involved in.
Wonderful. Thank you. Go ahead, Andre.
Close my mouth.
So for Dr. Wilson or Dr. Dinno?
Well, I actually had a question for anybody who was working with disparities. I just wanted to know if it's more of a funded type project or if it's more humanitarian work, and if you have a say in how humanitarian it is.
Are you asking about our own personal, what we've been presenting and inviting you to participate in, or about the field in general?
Oh, I guess what you're working in specifically.
Right. Currently, I don't have funding for undergraduate students, but I do have credit, school credit. So, yeah.
And one final question for Dr. Wilson, perhaps?
Yes, yeah? I have one.
Good.
I have been waiting. It said on your slide that you work with kids that have epilepsy. Do you work outside of that with kids that have seizures or with unknown causes?
Yeah, so that is actually, it's one of the other faculty members in my division who works within the pediatric epilepsy clinic, and there is a subset of those kids. They basically have a very large database that characterizes neuropsychological functioning in kids who are being evaluated for seizure disorders, and there is a subset of those kids who have what we would call non-epileptic seizures.
Right.
And those kids are part of that database as well. So.
My last question is, are there indicators that you've noticed in your research in toddler-age children who are suffering from pain that they can't verbalize, other than the tantruming and the crying and the...
Right. So there's it's a really interesting body of literature looking at infant behaviors and toddler behaviors that are indicators of pain, and there are some pretty well-validated like observational coding systems that are used in research, and there's some work to get parents' reports of those kinds of behaviors used in research. Pain is certainly an individual internal experience, so most of what we do in the field with children does somewhat depend on kids being old enough to be able to self-report, but there is some work with younger kids. And there has been some work looking at pain sensitivity in the lab with kind of preschool, middle childhood age kids, where they do a simple task like putting their hand in really cold water and timing how long before they pull it out. And that's something that can be done with kids at a fairly young age. So.
Thank you.